A single moment of quiet in a Senate hearing altered everything, not through anger but with unvarnished truth that shook the room. A man who once was brushed off as a voice too loud stood silent, and ultimately gave the overlooked their voice again. What does power do when it encounters someone who remembers those that it abandoned? If you've ever wondered whether dignity still matters in our politics, press play to take the plunge. A chill wind blew through the capital of the nation. But within that hearing room, something a great deal more potent moved. Not outrage, not scandal, but the simple, piercing weight of truth. One man stood, not to yell, not to triumph, but to remind a forgotten people what dignity once had looked like. Why do the powerful forget the vows they take? And what occurs when someone finally has the courage to hold up a mirror? This is not a political story. It's a story of suffering, of bravery, and of what it means to be seen. Let's start. It all unfolded in the U.S. Senate one afternoon's tension. What was to be an ordinary hearing promptly escalated into a moment no one anticipated. Senator Adam Schiff, out of the blue, snapped and branded Senator John Kennedy a thug, there in public view. However, Kennedy's icy calm, razor-sharp retort turned the whole room on its head. Even his harshest critics had no idea. That conversation soon went viral, and trust me, it was warranted. But let's get to the whole story before then. Take a moment to leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and tap that subscribe button so you won't miss more impactful stories like this one. Now back to that historic day. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was to be just another run-of-the-mill session. Senators filtered in, reporters filled the media alcove, and the cameras roamed the room. But something hung in the air, like the calm before a storm you didn't see approaching. Senator John Kennedy, the Republican from Louisiana, sat at the long table, pen in hand, posture straight, eyes twinkling with that playful look that says, "I'm ready for this." Across from him was Adam Schiff, the veteran Democrat from California. He was there to answer questions about his time leading the House Intelligence Committee during a particularly stormy political chapter. When the gavel fell, all seemed to start off as usual. Kennedy began his questioning, targeting Schiff's conduct in the Russia probe. Then, everything shifted. Schiff leaned in close, his tone cold and biting. "Senator Kennedy," he said, "to be honest, you don't belong here. You're nothing more than a suit-wearing thug with a showmanship-like cheap circus act." The room went silent. You might feel the shock ripple through the room. Staff members were frozen in place, mouths open, shocked. The cameras immediately homed in on Schiff's face, taking down each word as if they were jabs in a political fight. Right there, at the center of the Senate, a standoff had started, but Kennedy didn't even blink. He tilted his head slightly, that familiar smirk curling at the corners of his mouth, the kind that said, "I've been waiting for this." He looked calm, almost amused, like a hunter sizing up his target before making the first move. The room held its breath. For 5, maybe 10 seconds, everything stood still. Then Kennedy leaned toward the mic, his slow Louisiana drawl soft but slicing like a razor. "Senator Schiff," he said, "you call me a thug?" Well, back home in Louisiana, that's a compliment, especially when it comes from someone who's been chasing Russian ghosts while folks in your own district are sleeping under bridges in Oakland. A whispered murmur swept through the chamber. Kennedy's eyes roamed the room as he went on, every word infusing fire. "You've been a member of Congress for decades while California is drowning in homelessness. You go on the air talking about democracy while veterans in your state can't get a hot meal." A pen fell. The tiny clink rang out loudly in the stillness, as if emphasizing his words. Schiff fidgeted in his chair, a momentary flicker of unease crossing his face. Then Kennedy spoke in a low tone. It did not have to be loud. Each syllable struck with force. "You have no right to call me a thug," he said. "Not when you sit there speaking of justice, while tens of thousands of Californians sleep in tents, when children in Oakland grow up with not a glimmer of hope. Schiff's mouth opened to object, but before he could utter a word, the chair held up a hand. Let him continue. Kennedy didn't skip a beat. He stretched out a hand for a folder, set it on the table, and slowly opened it, like he was unwrapping the layers of a truth long concealed. "This is a public report," he declared, "but it's been overlooked for much too long." He raised a page. "When Oakland requested federal assistance to address the homelessness crisis, you didn't even move a finger." Gasps rippled through the room. The tension tightened. "You say you're protecting America from Russia?" Kennedy's eyes locked with Schiff's. "Meanwhile, more than 60,000 people in your own state are living on the streets." Schiff's jaw tightened. His fists clenched slightly as if trying to keep control. But Kennedy wasn't done, and that's only the beginning. Under public records of your own Intelligence Committee, high-ranking officials insisted there was not clear evidence of Trump colluding with Russia. And yet you appeared on TV repeatedly informing the nation you had proof, igniting a fire you knew would rage throughout the country. A young woman in the crowd, a person who had written a desperate letter to Schiff years before pleading for assistance, now sat gripping the armrest of her seat, her knuckles white. "Here's your revised version of the next block, keeping it concise, heartfelt, and emotionally level." A reporter, hardly above a whisper in the tension, said, "That was a heavy hit." Kennedy felt the gravity of the moment and modulated his tone. Now it was barely a whisper, soft but sharp. "Call me anything you like, Senator Schiff," he whispered, "but today, the world will see your real face." He held up a creased, aging letter, its postmark yellowed with years. "This," he continued, "is from Sarah, a single mother in Oakland. Sent it to your office, twice, pleading for assistance for her son. Never heard back." The buzz in the chamber intensified. One of Schiff's aides quietly looked down, manifestly unable to look anyone in the eye. Kennedy's eyes locked hard onto Schiff. "You call me a thug?" he said. "A thug doesn't walk away from the people they've sworn to protect. A thug doesn't hide behind pretty speeches while families in Oakland are struggling just to make it to tomorrow." His voice grew sharper, cutting through the room like a knife. "No, Senator," he continued. "A thug is not the fellow standing here now with Sarah's letter. A thug is the one who simulates nobility by turning his back on struggling citizens." Schiff reached for his microphone. His hand hesitated, but no sound issued. The silence was eloquent. Kennedy continued, more assertively now, his voice unflinching. "I came here to say the truth. I didn't come to be insulted. And I won't sit quietly while you dismiss hardworking Americans with slick words and icy indifference." Through the chamber, journalists scrambled to get the news out. Within minutes, snippets of Kennedy's statement were trending on social media. A high school student in Oakland, viewing on their phone, sniffled. "He's speaking for my mom," they whispered. Cable news programs had it up practically in a flash. Fox News dubbed it a pinnacle Senate showdown. CNN referred to it as a shocking and unforgettable moment. But within the chamber, Kennedy remained unchanged. He sat tranquil, serene, as if the tempest raging outside wasn't even touching him. Then, with a subdued determination, he placed another folder on the table. "Here's the file," he told me, "that indicates federal relief money intended for Oakland's small businesses was diverted following a call from your office." Schiff winced visibly. His complexion turned white. In the second row, a man who had written letter after letter to Schiff's office and never gotten a response couldn't contain himself anymore. Silent tears poured down his cheeks. "Today," Kennedy started, his tone low but with the kind of heft that caused the room to incline. These were words that people had been waiting to be told, perhaps too long. "The people of your state put their trust in you," he said, emotion gently threading through his voice. It sounded like the quiet sigh of someone who's carried a heavy burden for years. Mothers, strong, resilient, line up for hours just to get a bag of food. And while that's happening, you're on television, preaching about democracy and justice? He paused. That's not leadership, he said, his voice breaking slightly. That's betrayal. Schiff remained quiet, lips pursed, eyes fixed ahead. For once, the words were not coming. Then Kennedy gave the line that iced the whole room. Senator, this isn't personal. This is real pain. He waited for that to land. I'm from Louisiana. I know what it feels like to fight, day in and day out, when leaders turn their backs on their own people just to pursue the next spotlight. Someone has to ask, who's left to speak up for them? In the press gallery, a young journalist, once a resident of Oakland, felt tears prick at her eyes. Her mic was still warm. She breathed softly to herself. I never thought a Republican would move me like this. Kennedy faced the crowd now. His eye wasn't merely aimed, it was sincere. There was something more in it. This isn't all Washington politics, he told them. This is about the mothers in Oakland who've had to bury their children while the people they elected were smiling for TV cameras. He spoke slowly, deliberately, ensuring every word found its way to the hearts in the room. In Louisiana, I've witnessed families skipping a whole meal. Nobody checked in, nobody called. And now, seeing that same anguish out in the neighborhoods you serve, Senator Schiff, I have to ask, what have you ever done for them? All these years? Schiff blinked. His jaw clenched but did not respond. Then Kennedy picked up another letter. This was written in handwriting, with crooked letters and large print, obviously from a child. It is from an 11-year-old girl named Sarah, he explained. She wrote to your office twice, requesting assistance. She just wanted her grandmother to live in a safe environment. Kennedy read the letter out loud. In it, Sarah wrote of a house infested with roaches, no hot water, a grandmother who was too weak to make it up the stairs. No one ever responded. When Kennedy glanced up, half the room was wiping away tears in silence. I came today, he said quietly, for Sarah. For a moment, Schiff sat frozen, but then he leaned toward his mic, trying to hold himself steady. His voice trembled as he spoke. Senator Kennedy, this is just political theater, he said. You're using children's stories to smear me. But Kennedy didn't let him finish. With a steady, practiced hand, he extracted a photo from his sleeve and held it out for all to see. It was Senator Schiff beaming at a San Francisco function, clapping criminal justice reform. Kennedy's voice grew stronger, a tone that sliced through the room like a spotlight through mist. Something that most people don't understand, he claimed, is that same year, more than 60% of Oakland's affordable housing funds were diverted quietly, not to local families, but to investors from other states. Behind him, the screen on the hearing room sprang to life. Reports, emails, and somber statistics crowded the room, telling the story of California's worsening homelessness crisis and Schiff's concerning silence throughout. A young staffer seated behind Schiff quaked, let go of a folder, and hastily left the room. Kennedy spoke softly once more, but now his tone had the soft, firm cadence of a final judgment. You didn't fail the people you're sworn to serve. You left them behind, he said. You climbed onto their anguish to boost your own podium. He paused, collecting himself. His eyes weren't indignant. They were serious, firm, authentic. I don't derive any pleasure in this, he added. This is not revenge. This is what happens when someone finally meets the truth. He then faced the chair of the committee. I request, he said deferentially, that these public reports by Oakland's community organizations documenting that Senator Schiff's office dismissed hundreds of communications from constituents seeking assistance with housing and employment be incorporated into the official record. The chair nodded gravely. On the screen behind them, there was a damning report. Dozens of community calls were diverted directly into a voicemail box that was never even listened to. Schiff remained motionless. His shoulders sagged, his eyes glaring straight ahead, blank, nearly empty, as if the burden of it all had just come crashing down on him. Kennedy addressed the audience now. "If this is the model of leadership," he said, his voice firm but laced with emotion, "then our people deserve better. Our country deserves better." Then quite suddenly he faced Schiff again. His voice was firm, no malice, no bitterness. "I don't bear a grudge, Senator," he told him, "because this isn't about grudges. This is about truth, and the truth starts when the falsehoods stop." The room fell silent. Then there was a gentle wave of applause, soft, respectful, interspersed with the quiet noises of people sweeping away tears. Something had changed, not out of rage, but because something profoundly true had finally been said out loud. Outside of that Senate chamber, beyond the power suits and waxed floors, something profoundly human was taking place. In a tiny community center in Oakland, a handful of veterans and homeless neighbors stood around an old TV hacked to a tablet. The screen buzzed as Kennedy read aloud Sarah's letter, the one from the little girl asking for assistance for her grandmother. Clara, a 78-year-old who lived on just enough to survive, burst into tears. "That little girl," she whispered, clutching her chest, "she lives on my street." A man standing nearby got up, his voice quivering. "Schiff gave up on us long ago." The video spread quickly, all the way to the very streets that mattered most. To them, Kennedy's words were not politics. They were a lifeline. They were truth. They were pain, finally said out loud. Back in the hearing room, Schiff remained immobile, silent, reflective, nearly lost in the tempest that had mounted up around him. His aides whispered anxiously, lawyers leaned forward tensely, and even his Democratic colleagues, usually eager to jump in, were quiet. Kennedy spoke into the silence, deep, commanding, and borne on the burden of years. "This is not a Republican or Democrat issue," he asserted. "This is about individuals who have been left behind for far too long. Generations of pain, and no one ever heard." He rose slowly from his chair, smoothed out his suit jacket, and put one hand on the table, like he was anchoring himself in something tangible. "I'm not a polished man," he explained. "Did not grow up with money or Ivy League educations. I grew up in Louisiana, surrounded by people who understood what it was like to have to fight just to eat." The room was completely silent. "So when you use the term thug to refer to me," he said quietly, "I understand what you're actually saying. You're not accusing me of being a criminal. You're pushing aside poverty. You're sweeping away the pleas of honest, working men and women. You're telling us we don't belong here, people like my mama, who prayed I'd someday stand in this room." Throughout the chamber, a younger senator who once disbelieved Kennedy bowed his head, quietly embarrassed. A woman to his right clutched her pen so hard it broke. "I'm standing here today, not because of patronage, not because of backroom politics, but because I never gave up trying. Even when the world told me I didn't have a place here, the crowd didn't budge. Some blushed away tears. So no, Senator Schiff," Kennedy declared, voice firm and sincere. "I'm not a thug. I am the voice of every person you forgot." Schiff lunged for the microphone, his hand shaking, the blaze he started now all but extinguished. But before he could lean in, Kennedy stepped back in softly, yet as sharp as ever. "Don't speak yet, sir." Kennedy's voice was measured, calm, but it chilled the air like winter wind. "Just one question," he breathed. When was the last time you strolled the streets of Oakland without cameras following behind you? When was the last time you sat next to a homeless man without a speech in your hand? The question wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It sliced clean, deep, like a scalpel cutting through each level of distance between privilege and pain. Schiff parted his lips, but no sound emerged. His silence was more forceful than any response he might have made. Kennedy reached forward, softly dropping a photo on the table. It was Schiff at a candlelight vigil years ago for a young man named Jamal, a life lost to violence in Oakland. Schiff had vowed reform back then, vowed change. Nothing changed. Obvious as a BB shot, Kennedy said, not with anger, but with regret that hung on every word. But his mother hasn't forgotten you. For the first time, cameras captured Schiff not as a senator, but as a man. Stunned, silent, and unmistakably ashamed. When the session adjourned for recess, the hallway outside erupted. Reporters rushed for sound bites. Senate aides stood rooted, wide-eyed. A whispered awe swept through the crowd. Did Kennedy just destroy Schiff's whole career without even yelling? A shocked staffer whispered. An NBC reporter stood frozen, replaying the moment on her phone, not able to tear her eyes away. Even Kennedy's opponents didn't get a word in. They didn't have to. Because this moment wasn't about party affiliations. It was about truth. Raw, unadulterated, long overdue. Two former Schiff aides sat in a silent break room, their eyes red-rimmed. One of them, Marcus, whispered, "All of what Kennedy wrote, we witnessed." The other shook his head slowly, troubled. Until we received orders not to reply to letters from the slums, because they didn't count. Kennedy was back in the chamber, sitting alone at his desk. Letters from Oakland, from San Francisco, from mothers and vets and kids, all set out before him like mute witnesses. His hand shook, not of fear, but of the burden of it all. When the recess ended, Schiff returned slowly into the room, no longer the man who had entered an hour and a half before. His eyes did not meet the room. The chair cleared his throat and looked to Kennedy. "You have the final word." Kennedy stood. No notes, no drama. "I know some of you came in this morning looking for boilerplate politics, a hearing, a debate. But this isn't that." He faced Schiff, his words gentle as if he were speaking to someone he used to respect. "This is a reckoning." And then, with calm hands, he held up a final report. "This report," he said, "indicates that more than $3 million in housing repair funds intended for families in Oakland and San Francisco disappeared. While those houses stood with leaking roofs, black mold, and children sleeping next to cracked walls." He didn't need to. Each word fell like truth-shattering stone. "This intelligence," he continued, "was provided by a whistleblower, someone who at one time trusted you." A whisper ran through the room, not the noise of outrage, but of acknowledgement, of hearts shattering open. Kennedy's voice did not rise. It fell lower, more slowly, like a father telling the truth his children were never prepared to hear. "She called 7 times, he repeated. 7 winters, Senator Schiff, and each time, silence responded back. The camera leaned in softly on Mrs. Ellen Carter in the crowd. Her eyes glazed, her hands shaking in her lap, clutching a folded paper towel rather than a tissue. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was the narrative. Kennedy wheeled around, confronting Schiff head-on now. "Is this what representation looks like?" he demanded. "A woman cowering under a tarp while her ceiling crashes down and her senator gets ready for a national interview?" Schiff's mouth opened, whether to lie or to sidestep. No words emerged. The chamber waited. Kennedy returned to the center of the room, step by step in silence. "I didn't come here to tear you down," he whispered. "I came here because they've been down for too long already." He turned toward the committee table, holding up a second document. "This one," he said, "lists over 400 unanswered calls from constituents across Oakland and San Francisco, all documented, all ignored. Every name is real, every voice dismissed." He paused, letting the weight settle. Then added, his voice cracking ever so slightly, "You say I'm exploiting pain." "No, Senator. I'm giving it a microphone." Reporters stood frozen behind their cameras. A CNN reporter leaned in and whispered, "This isn't testimony. It's a reckoning with the American soul." In the audience, another older man stood up. He had one leg missing, his Vietnam vet hat cocked forward. "My son died in that mold-infested apartment." He was barely audible. "He begged for help. No one came." Someone gasped. Schiff's head fell forward. Kennedy made his way slowly to the table and carefully placed down the last paper. "This is his letter. You never read it." A low sob came from somewhere in the crowd, but Kennedy didn't wait for dramatic effect. This was no play. It was reality, unvarnished and unshakable. "Titles don't insulate you from responsibility, Senator," he added at last. "And silence doesn't absolve you." There was a silence then, a silence not of politicking or posing, but of profound communal sorrow. Then Kennedy turned toward the chair and spoke simply, "I rest my case not as a senator, but as a witness for the people you forgot." The room did not explode. It did not have to. It breathed, like a wound finally seen. In the hallway outside the chamber, it was crowded, not with protesters or paparazzi, but with quiet citizens, veterans, mothers, formerly silenced voices now ringing out with hope. As Kennedy exited, he walked past them, not with victory but with humility. A small boy held aloft a hand-scribbled sign, "Thank you for reading our letters." He stopped, knelt, and touched the paper with a soft nod. No words, only a glance that said, "I heard you, I still do." Inside, Schiff sat still, deflated, haunted, not by scandal or political loss, but by the heavy burden of truth too long denied. In the press room, the networks hesitated before talking. One MSNBC host whispered on air, "We've seen speeches, we've seen takedowns, but this was a mirror held to the soul of public service. Fox, CNN, NPR. It didn't matter. For once, the division faded, because truth doesn't wear a party badge." In Oakland, Mrs. Ellen Carter sat quietly at a cafe with a borrowed phone in her hand. Her picture, snapped just minutes before, was already making the rounds on social media, captioned in a single sentence. She was never supposed to matter. But today, she did. And Sarah, the little girl who penned the letter. She watched the hearing replay with her grandmother at her side. When Kennedy uttered her name, she gasped. "That's me," she whispered, eyes filled with tears. Her grandmother smiled through suffering. "No, baby, that's us. All of us." In Washington, Kennedy emerged into the chill air, unknotted his tie, and gazed upward at the gray sky. He didn't dance in the street. There was no victory dance. Only the slow release of a man who had brought others' suffering to the floor of power and refused to let it be silenced. One reporter did finally ask, "Senator, what happens next?" Kennedy hesitated, then replied in steadfast calm, "We build. We show up, and we listen. Because the people, they've spoken. Now it's time we answer." That evening, no victory celebrations, no media tours, only silence, reflection, and something that was almost holy. In his Washington apartment, Kennedy sat at the window, Capitol Hill's lights twinkling softly in the distance. The black notebook, the one with stories and pain, lay on the table next to a warming cup of coffee. He did not open it. He did not have to. Across America, that notebook was already engraved in the minds of millions. In Detroit, a mechanic said to his teenage son, "That man didn't just speak, he carried us with him." In Phoenix, a teacher copied out the hearing transcript and distributed it to her civics class. "This," she told them, "is what democracy sounds like when someone finally listens." News cycles changed, not to scandal, but to substance. Analysts argued not Kennedy's politics, but his integrity. One panelist remarked softly, "We didn't see a takedown. We saw a resurrection of truth, of accountability, of forgotten people." Back at Schiff's office, the atmosphere was beyond recognition. Staff worked slowly, some emptying out desks. A young aide typed out a resignation letter with tear-stained eyes. "I did not sign up to ignore people. I thought we were here to serve them." And Sarah, just a kid with crayons and guts, she became a symbol, not of pity, but of power. The image of Kennedy holding her faded photo became the photo of the decade, captioned across headlines. She mattered. Finally. Past midnight, Kennedy finally closed the curtains. He took one last glance at the Capitol, not with disdain, but with a silent promise. "I'm not done." Because for every Mrs. Ellen, every Jamal, every call that was never returned, there were still more names, more truths, more reckonings. And in that still apartment, a Southern-drawling senator with a creased notebook started writing back. One letter at a time. Schiff's eyes hovered over the envelope. For an instant, something gave behind the political facade. He stretched for the letter, but did not open it. Not yet. The reporters pushed forward, their questions biting, their cameras relentless, but Schiff just turned and went away. Not out of disrespect, but like a man burdened by something much heavier than scandal, his own quiet. That night, Kennedy took a commercial flight home to Louisiana. No entourage, no cameras, just a frayed duffel bag, a notebook, and a man who had done what few were brave enough. Speak truth, even when it made the ground beneath his feet tremble. On the plane, an older black woman in the aisle seat next to him leaned over. She didn't ask for a selfie. She didn't ask for promises. She just touched his arm and said, "You gave us back our voice." He nodded silently, gazing out at the clouds. His thoughts weren't on headlines. They were on Ellen, Sarah, Jamal, all the names scribbled in a notebook that no one else would ever read, but he never could forget. In Washington, the hearing room remained vacant once more, but the silence had shifted. It wasn't indifference now. It was aftermath, the sort that only appears when something real has been said and the country is learning how to breathe once more. The gavel of the chair descended slowly, not in charge, but in awe. What had started as a hearing finished as an accounting. Outside the Capitol building, the clouds grew dark with incoming rain, but people did not move. The crowds lingered, quiet, somber, united in something unusual, truth without agenda. That evening, Lisa Monroe guest starred on a late-night news program. The anchor invited, "Senator, was this the start of Kennedy's political ascent?" She paused. "No," she said softly. "It was the revival of public honor." In Oakland, Pastor Darnell lit a candle before the altar. He did not speak that night. He simply repeated Kennedy's final words from the sound system. The candle danced against the stained glass windows. "I won't let those tears fall in vain." Dozen men and women dropped to their knees. In Los Angeles, Detroit, Kansas City, they congregate, not to chant slogans, not to wave party signs, but to feel seen at last. A close-up of Kennedy standing by himself on an empty Louisiana pier. He cradles the same notebook, worn and heavy. He adds a final signature to the back page, "America." He does not smile, but for the first time in years, his shoulders unbend slightly. A breath on the wind. "Let this be the beginning, not the end." On-screen text. "In honor of the unheard, the unseen, the unforgotten, truth is never loud, but it is forever." The next morning the sun rose. Something had shifted, not in the corridors of power, but in the hearts of ordinary people. In Richmond, a teacher started her civics class not with a textbook, but by listening to Kennedy's final words. Her students, once jaded, sat quietly, attentive. "This," she whispered, "is what it is to represent." The Senate Judiciary Committee released a rare bipartisan statement. Senator Kennedy's testimony reminds us that truth, when spoken with humility, has the power to realign the conscience of a nation. In the West Wing, an aide commented to President Trump, "Sir, he didn't just reveal corruption. He revealed why people stopped trusting." Trump nodded. "And perhaps why they might begin again." In a cramped Oakland apartment, Sarah put her crumpled letter away in her drawer. No longer a shout into an empty space, but a message received. The murals multiplied, not as graffiti, but as scripture in paint. One read, "Not with fists, not with fame, but with heart." Signed below in spray paint. "We the people in Louisiana." Kennedy had passed by one of those murals. He paused, following the painted letters with his finger. A little girl came running up to him. "Are you the man who listened?" He smiled, dropping to a knee. "No, sweetheart. I'm the man who finally heard." Kennedy did not exact revenge, simply flipped on the switch, and within the light, the truth towered high. The true lesson? You don't require power to effect change. A letter, a question, a voice can shift mountains when uttered with courage. Mrs. Ellen Carter appeared. Sarah had the courage to write. And Kennedy? He listened, truly listened. Let that be our lesson. Dare to voice your opinion. Dare to care, because truth without action dissipates, but truth with heart. That's how we restore trust, mend wounds, and speak for the forgotten. So listen hard to your neighbors, lift up stories like Sarah's, and don't forget, honoring is not about changing history, but the heart behind the voice. Thank you for accompanying us on this ride. Stay tuned, because the battle for dignity and truth is just getting started. See you in the next story, but truth with heart, that's how we restore trust, mend wounds, and speak for the forgotten. So listen hard to your neighbors. Lift up stories like Sarah's. And don't forget, honoring is not about changing history, but the heart behind the voice. Thank you for accompanying us on this ride. Stay tuned, because the battle for dignity and truth is just getting started. See you in the next story.